All right, welcome everyone to this week's meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, it's freezing up here. I've got snow upon snow upon snow in my front yard, my sidewalk, my walkways, but we're going to be talking some baseball tonight because thank goodness spring training is here soon. Those wonderful pictures of warmth and high blue skies are going to be on our television sets. And I can't wait because if anybody knows what's going on up here right now, that's like million-mile-an-hour winds and freezing and whatnot, I'm not going out there until that's done. Last time I tried that stunt, we all know what happened. I fell down the driveway. Let's get this started right. And let's go to one of the best that Boston has to offer. Joanne Hulbert, you've got some information and a poem for us tonight, don't you, Joanne?
That is correct.
Go.
And so anyway, I want to give a heads up to everybody that there is an event coming up the first weekend in May, the 2nd, 3rd, and the 4th. And the title on it is that it is basically the 3rd National Baseball Poetry Festival. Very lofty title. From the 2nd to the 4th, it's going to be a Polo Park in Worcester. Not Worcester, that's in Worcester. So anyway, in order to get all the information, the schedule of events, it's quite an open event. It's like you don't have to pay a fee to get into it and everything. But in order to find out everything that's going on, you can go to their website for this, and it's Baseball Poetry Fest, all one word, .org. And it will give you all of the list of events, including going to games and all sorts of other activities that are involved with it. Now, I am very excited about it. I mean, I was so excited about it. I went out. I already have the T-shirt. Anyway, one of the keynote speaker that is going to be there is E. Ethelbert Miller. If any of you know about him, he is what we would characterize as the poet laureate of the 21st century in regard to baseball. He writes the best stuff. He has 3 compilations of his poetry that you can get via Amazon and probably a lot of other places too. And but his stuff is absolutely fantastic. There is no equal to it in this era. And so I wanted to pick out one of my favorite ones out of all of my favorite ones that are in his 3 compilations. That the title on the poem is Querido Clemente. Need I say more? Okay, here we go. Your death, the other earthquake, the plane crash, a reminder that miracles disappear. You left us on the edge of December, the last day of the year. From Puerto Rico to Nicaragua, we stared into an empty ocean, filling it with our tears. Lost was our beautiful pirate, our shining jewel who played right field with amazing grace. Your throws, arrows cutting through the space forever somewhere. You're running the bases with dignity, helped us all hold our heads up and count the stars in Spanish. Ta-da.
Love it. That's terrific. Thank you.
This is out of one of the compilations. It's How I Found Love Behind the Catcher's Mask. Well, you'll have to find out what that enters into by getting the compilation. The other is If God Invented Baseball. And one of these poems I loaned in a way to Herb Crean, who down here in the Boston area, he lives in Natick, and once a year he does a baseball Sunday during the summer in one of the churches in Natick. And I have been feeding him material for years for it and everything. And I got him a bit of the Miller poems, and he's going to be using them in his next. And a third book, When Your Wife Has Tommy John Surgery. Another one you're going to have to find out by reading it. But anyway, he's one of the best poets in regard to baseball that we have living today. And if you are into this sort of thing, definitely look him up. He's absolutely fantastic. So there you go. Get to the poetry festival. It should be a lot of fun.
Joanne, were you involved with the found poetry book?
Oh yeah, yes. I made a contribution.
So that's coming out shortly too.
Yeah,
That'll be out in March. The title is "Here Come the Pizza."
Right, your pizza, yeah. And the thing is that it was kind of a joint effort that they approached. Well, they started with Bill Nowlin, and he had a suggestion and everything. And my addition was to kind of recreate it by putting it in a different order. Let's put it that way. Put it in a more poetic order. So it's kind of a joint effort, but that's a contribution from Boston for sure.
I can't wait for that book. Should be coming out next month. That's really great. So.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to Jeff Cohen. Jeff, what's going on with that pod, man? Hit me. You're muted, my dude.
I could have sworn I clicked the unmute, but whatever. Yes, on Baseball and BBQ this week, we had an interview with Wally Backman, but I want to just promote the next couple of weeks because we have the great Ed Randall coming up, Al Clark, the former umpire, and we actually had an interview, our interview with Buck Showalter. So that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. So tune into Baseball and Barbecue, and just to let you know, Eric Gray was on our show on episode 232, which is almost a year ago, Eric. Can you believe it? March 30th, 2024. So
easily. Right.
Check that out also. Thank you, Bruce.
Appreciate you, Jeff. Ben Abel, what's going on with your pod, the Golden V podcast? What's going on with that?
We had a couple of really successful recent podcasts related to baseball with SABR Day. And there was another one back in the archives from November. The one in the archives back from November is an interview with then Vancouver Canadians manager Brent LaValle, who is now the New Hampshire Fisher Cats manager. And I reached out to Brent directly actually last Thursday when I saw it on Twitter. The Vancouver Canadians themselves didn't officially post anything until today about the announcement, but I had reached out to Brent directly. And he responded right away saying, yep, that was confirmed. So the Brent LaValle will now be the manager of your New Hampshire Fisher Cats. In the interim, I also sent an email. I didn't see a response from Brent. Obviously, he's pretty busy with the start of spring training with the Blue Jays, but I'm hoping that Brent will come to this podcast as a guest of Bruce, and hopefully that he'll have some involvement with your chapter when the Fisher Cats start their season.
I know I responded to Brent in that email thread as well, and I figure I'm not going to hear back much from him until probably the close of spring training, and he's texting me while he's on the airplane heading up here. But I look forward to having him on with all of us as the season begins, and that leads me into my next comment. Ben, thank you for all of that. Our chapter project is ongoing. The folks who have gotten together to really get this off the ground and get it going have a lot of things in play right now. I am awaiting a phone call from the New Hampshire Fisher Cats so that we can get on their promotional schedule and get a date for us to have our table and our display there this year. The New Hampshire Fisher Cats are hosting SABR. It's going to be a great day. I hope I'm going to see an awful lot of you who are local to us here in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont, and such, and come out for a day at the ballpark. Let's show them what SABR's all about. Let's show them how rabid we are for baseball and how much we'd like to partner with that club. So there'll be more on that as we're moving forward. I want to get that date, so I think I'm going to be banging on their phone tomorrow, see if I can't get them to schedule me. So, all right. On with our feature presentation. One day during an afternoon at the ballpark, author Eric Gray asked his wife, daughter, and a friend to identify their favorite game that they'd been to. Little did he know that simple question would soon take on a life of its own. As the question made its way to family members, friends, friends of friends, strangers, and beyond, it gave way to a surprising collection of incredibly diverse stories and perspectives. Thus, Bases to Bleachers was born. Much more than your average baseball book, the many special and unique stories shared with the readers here, whether they're about watching or playing either at the major league level or little league, represent a wide gamut of experiences. Some entail meetings the stars or attending famous games, and some offered our personal, intimate moments involving family connections and the importance of baseball in people's lives. Backyards to ballparks. More personal baseball stories from the stands and beyond is the second volume. The stories are different, but the heart and soul of the book is the same. They all have in common that tribute to why baseball remains the American pastime, how it connects with friends, family, communities. These memories, often more human interest than play of game in nature, all have baseball as a setting, but speak to how baseball provides joy and anguish, nourishes family traditions, creates friendships, and could profoundly affect you. Originally from Plainview, New York, SABR member Eric Gray has lived in San Francisco since 1974. He had a 39-year career in the U.S. Department of Labor, administering job training and employment programs for disadvantaged youth, most of that time spent in the Job Corps program. He and his wife, Lynn, have 2 adult children, Rachel in San Francisco and David in Washington, D.C. His hobbies include rock and roll, following politics, playing and watching baseball and basketball, and hiking. Eric Gray. Welcome to Northern New England, my friend. How are you this evening?
Well, I'm a little verklempt from that incredible introduction. Thank you.
The floor is yours, my friend. Go get
I'm
him.
blushing a little, a couple of goosebumps there. And before I even start, what I have to say is that, as is often the case when you're talking baseball, for me in my books, is somebody will say something that triggers either a memory or something else that I know about through baseball that somebody has told me. And regarding Clemente, for those of you who don't know the great singer-songwriter Chuck Brodsky, you should, if you like music and of course you like baseball. He's got a wonderful song called Clemente, and 3 of the stories in my first book all have to do with a single throw by Roberto Clemente. All different throws, but 3 people, their most important stories involved a Clemente throw. That pretty much says what you need to say about Roberto, how great he was. Thank you, Bruce, for inviting me to this, and to so many of you for spending an hour or however long we go on this evening. I really appreciate it. It's really great for me to see my old friends Perry and Maxwell and Jeff. Thank you for being here. You've all been to a bunch of my readings, so I'll take that as a compliment that you came back. To go over briefly some of what Bruce talked about with the introduction is, I was at a ball game with my wife and my daughter and a friend. What's your favorite game you've ever been to? They gave me an answer. I sent an email to about 30 people asking them what their favorite story was. And or what their favorite memory was. And I gave several examples for me. One of them was being at the game and they retired Mickey Mantle's number. Another was when a photographer took my kids onto the field at spring training and got a picture of Dusty Baker with his arms around them. Another was going to the first World Series game in 2010 with my daughter. And there's a reason why that's so meaningful, not just because I was at a World Series game. Anyway, I emailed 30 people or so, and I included one of my friends, Andy, who likes baseball less than anybody I've ever known. And I did it just to give him a hard time, because that's what Andy and I do with each other. And he sent me a story that was so personal that I knew what I had to do. And then I began reaching out to more friends and, telling about this project I'm working on. If you're walking down the street and you had a Red Sox shirt or a Braves hat or whatever, I was telling about this project. Do you have a story you want to share? And then I joined Facebook, and a lot of you are on Facebook, and the goods and the bads of Facebook. But for me, it was tremendous because I got a chance to meet a number of people, including the 3 people I mentioned here, as well as the number of stories I got from all over the world. And it was astonishing. By the time I put out my first book, which is not that one, it's this one, Bases to Bleachers, I had 1,250 stories from around the world. There were 17 countries. By the time my second book came out, and I did not use all my best stories, on the advice of my wife, because I did not want my second book to be the the book version of Ghostbusters 2, which might have been the worst movie of all time after such a great first one. I then had, by that point, I had 2,000 stories, including the ones I used, and now I've got 2,500. So I'll say in advance, after you hear some of these stories and you get a sense of what this is about, if you have a story, there might very well be a third book, but we can talk about that later. Right now, I just kind of want to get into some of these stories because that's why I'm here. This is a story from a guy I met at a spring training game in Phoenix. It's from the chapter To Catch a Ball or Not. July 29th, 1990, I was at Candlestick Park with my wife, Diane. Our seats were 12 rows up from first base, an area where you had to be ready to catch a foul ball at any time. In the bottom half of the first inning, I noticed a rather large fan carefully picking his way through the maze of legs, feet, beers, and peanut shells to get to his seat while he was carrying a large beer and a Polish sausage. Just as he was about to sit down, I heard the crack of a bat, and I looked up to see a towering foul ball headed his way. With one hand clutching his beer, the other cradling the Polish sausage, you could clearly see the indecision and panic on his face. At the last second, he set his beer cup in Polish on the cement between his feet and reached up to catch the ball, but he was too late. The ball passed between his outstretched hands, and like a guided missile, it scored a direct hit on the sausage, sending up a cloud of meat, mustard, and relish that thoroughly covered the unlucky fan and knocked over his beer. The ball squirted 5 seats to the left, where another fan made an easy catch of the mustard-slathered ball. Needless to say, we all felt sorry for the poor fellow as he trudged back up the aisle, covered in the remnants of what should have been a fine ballpark meal. The Giants won that day, shutting out the Reds 4-0. This fan too was shut out from his lunch and the ballpark's greatest souvenir. That's John Aiken in Pine Top, Arizona. I only have a couple of stories in each book, so when I talk about these books, when I brag about these books, which I do, it's never look how wonderful I am. It's always how incredibly fortunate I was that so many people, and Perry has a story in each of my books, that so many people were willing to share their great memories. In some cases, pretty intimate, personal stories. And I've just been very fortunate. This is one of my stories. In the first book, there was a chapter called What Baseball Means to Me, because I came to learn that for some people, it was much more important than I love this game. It became a core chapter of the book. I knew the chapter had to be repeated in the second book. In the second book, all different stories, of course. In the second book, the chapter is called My Player, My Team, My Game, and this is one of my stories. After 50 years attending hundreds of ball games, I had still never seen a no-hitter. I wasn't there on June 13, 2012, when Matt Cain stepped onto the AT&T mound, but I was watching on TV. My wife Lynn and I watched the whole thing, and our daughter Rachel was working at the park as usual for home games. As our collective favorite player, Matt Cain, was tossing more and more zeros, 0 hits, 0 runs, 0 errors, 0 walks, the tension and anxiety began to rise in our household. From 3,000 miles away, four-way text began with our son David, who knew he should be going to sleep, but couldn't pass on the chance to watch history be made. Gregor Blanco's catch in the 7th was the first breathtaking moment. For the last play, a tough hop to Joaquin Arias, who had replaced Panda for defensive purposes, made him step backward, taking away any momentum toward first. But the play was made, Cain pumped his fist, and then came the call, a brief one at 1 o'clock in the morning from David. This was history. Just a 22nd perfect game ever. It was our favorite player who had accomplished this feat, and it was obvious that once again, this magical game of baseball had connected the four of us, from our home in San Francisco, to the press elevator in the park, to an apartment in DC, to the pitcher's mound. 5 years later, Lynn and I got tickets for the last game of the 2017 season. Lynn likes this game, Fan Appreciation Day, at which prizes are given away like water to racers in a marathon. But I went that day because I knew it would be the last game Matt Cain would ever pitch. Several years of ineffectiveness, caused in part by the injuries that suddenly plagued this once impervious horse, resulted in his decision at the relatively young age of 33 to hang him up rather than to keep pushing for to regain a past magic. We knew we'd get to start one last time after half a season doing bullpen mop-up work. He did, and he was magnificent, reaching back and pitching like the Matt Cain of old. And fittingly, befitting the term coined from his name, He got caned, receiving no run support. He pitched 5 innings, the last reputedly on fumes and adrenaline, and he took the loss. Still our guy, I thought, as today I watched the ceremonies inducting him onto the Giants Wall of Fame. And it still makes me a little teary when I read the story. He will be my last ever favorite player. Well, maybe now that he's re-signed with the Mets, maybe Alonso's going to sneak in there. But Matt Cain was not only my guy, but the guy of our entire family. And full disclosure for any of you guys who really look into the details, I did not fact check myself. It was not the last game of the season. It was the next to the last. He did not take the loss, but everything else is accurate. This is a story from my first book. I read this. It was somebody I met in Job Corps, someone I mentored. Long story, I won't go into the whole thing. But when I got back in touch with her, she said, I don't really have any baseball stories. I'm not that much of a fan, but send me your book description. I have a lot of friends who do. You'll get a lot of stories. I got one story from one friend of hers 3 years later, but I got this from Sarah the next day. And I'll explain why this story is so important. I'm not a fan of any sports. I've been to a few baseball games, but only when I'd get free tickets and go for the experience of drinking beer, eating stadium food, and having a good time with friends. It's not that I don't like baseball. I just don't know much about the game, who the players are, or many of the rules. I was in Job Corps for a Job Corps conference, meeting my friend Pearl in the bar of the hotel where I was staying. When I got to the bar in the late afternoon, there were just a few people there, but not Pearl. An older gentleman was sitting alone at the bar, and I thought it'd be safe to sit next to him as I preferred not to sit alone. I asked if I could join him while waiting for my friend. We had a few drinks, chatted about life, my job, the fact that I liked working with young adults, and that I was excited to see my friend who I hadn't seen for quite a while. He shared little about himself. I was just glad I felt comfortable with him and that we could sit there together. When Pearl showed up, I turned to the man and said it was nice to meet him, although we didn't exchange names. We didn't know each other's names. I introduced myself and he said, it's nice to meet you, Sarah. My name is Ernie Banks. We shook hands and I went to sit with my friend. My friend, a native Chicagoan, asked who I was talking to, and when I told her, she started to shake a little bit and asked me if I knew who Ernie Banks was. Well, yes, he's the man over there at the bar, I answered. That's Ernie Banks. That's Mr. Cub. You got to ask him for his autograph. He's the most famous Cub player ever. So I wandered back over and said, Mr. Banks, my friend over there tells me I need to get your autograph. You're Mr. Cub? You must have been one great basketball player. Well, that made him laugh, and he said it was great to be in Chicago having a casual conversation with someone who had no idea who he was, and by the way, he played baseball with the Cubs, not basketball. He gave me an autograph and wished me luck. We'd had a great conversation, a few laughs, two strangers keeping each other company on a slow afternoon in a bar. Everyone to whom I tell that story laughs when I mention Ernie's name, and they can't believe I had no idea the Cubs were a baseball team. I still have that autograph somewhere. He even wrote, good luck with Job Corps. That's Sarah West in Minneapolis. A year after the book came out, Sarah sent me a photo of the autograph that he had signed. It was too late to get it in the book, but I had no doubt that it was true. Now, the reason this story is so important is my original thought was that a story had to take place at a ball game to be in this book. I got the story and I said, oh my God, what a great story. And then I said, but there's no place for it. And then the third thing I said was, of course there has to be a place for it. So this story was really instrumental in making me realize I had to make my structure fit my content rather than my content fitting the structure. I hope that makes sense. This is a story from, well, I'm sure a lot of you are Red Sox fans and probably don't like the Yankees. So this pokes a little bit of fun at the Yankees. This is a story from a woman that my wife and I were in Cabo San Lucas, and we were on the way in the shuttle van back to the airport. I started talking to a woman who had a Seattle hat on. I didn't remember that we had met her the week before going to the airport, but this is Marie's story. In July of 2002, our family went to Yankee Stadium to take in the sights and watch a game. It was a hot afternoon, and the stadium was packed. Our seats were in the third deck on the first base side, and in the section to our right was a family of about 50 plus people, ranging in ages from newborn kids to elderly grandparents. I know they were family because I spoke pre-incident with one of the characters. During the game, one of the family members kept dipping his fingers into his beer and dripping it down the pants of his relative sitting in front of him. At one point, I said to my daughter Lisa, who was 12, very innocent and naive, and to my sister-in-law Kathy, this was not going to end well if the beer dripping kept up. Sure enough, around the 6th inning, the drippy had enough. He stood up. Visual, lots of tattoos, shorts below his butt, multiple piercings. He turned around and he landed a right hook onto his relative's jaw. At that point, the majority of the family of 50 plus started fighting, kids included, pushing, shoving each other down the rows, piling up at the cement wall at the first row. My first thought, wow, the holidays must really be something at their house. My second thought, these people are going to fall over the edge and end up on the 200 level. At this point, Tattoo Man lost his shorts. They came completely off along with his boxers right in front of 12-year-old Lisa. She saw everything, and I do mean everything. Next, the police and security people arrived and pushed me, Lisa, and Kathy out of our seats onto my husband, Larry, my brother, Mark, and my 2 sons. They had no clue what was going on. Larry told me to sit down and watch the baseball game, and I said I couldn't because the police had taken over our seats. Ultimately, the whole section was ejected from the stadium for fighting. Some were even arrested and taken away in handcuffs. This is a baseball memory that's engraved in our family's memory bank forever, especially Lisa's. I think the Yankees won that game. We regularly attend Seattle Mariners games and have never witnessed anything close to this. Yankee baseball at its finest. It must be an East Coast thing. That's from Marie Totally in Kirkland, Washington. We have remained friends. I have met her entire family, and they all, especially Lisa, seem remarkably well adjusted given what they went through. This is a story that I know how to cater to the audience, right? So for those of you Red Sox fans, we were in New York visiting my friend. Lynn wanted a cup of coffee. We went to a coffee shop. It was a young woman wearing a Wrigley Field t-shirt. I told her about the book I'm writing. Does she have a story? She goes, yes. Never heard from her. But there was a guy sitting to her left who said, I've got a story for you. And this is Jesse's story. This is from the chapter, an autograph, a chat, a meeting with a star. On April 20th, 2007, my parents and I were in town to see our beloved Red Sox take on the Orioles at Camden Yards. Wandering around Baltimore's Inner Harbor with my mother on a clear, sunny spring day, ready for lunch, we passed a cheesecake factory. I not so subtly nudged Mom, saying, Mom, look, Jason Veritek is eating here. We have to go. We chose the outside seating option for the weather, hoping to see the Sox captain. We shook hands with Orioles infielder Brian Roberts and Red Sox pitcher Kyle Snyder, and we were seated at the table next to Veritek and his friends. My 14-year-old self was trying to contain his excitement and maintain civility and dining etiquette. My intentions only waned when Mom abruptly blurted out, oh my God, Jesse, it's David Ortiz. I was wearing my Red Sox number 34 jersey, Ortiz's. As he passed by, he patted me on the shoulder and said, nice shirt, man. Look, honestly, I don't know exactly what Ortiz's voice is, but you may not either, so let's go with it. This was turning into quite an afternoon. Big Papi was sitting at the vacated table next to Veritek's. Imagine this uncontrollably excited 14-year-old Red Sox fan and his mother simply seeking a place to eat lunch, now sitting in a table triangle featuring 2 of the most popular Red Sox players in recent memory. As we ordered and chatted about our nearly fantastical scenario, fans started imposing on these stars' space, asking for autographs and pictures. I just sat and watched. Mid-meal, I nearly spat out my lunch, my Cheesecake Factory favorite, orange chicken, and I quietly exclaimed, Mom, Manny Ramirez is here. He sat down with his Dominican pal Ortiz. So now the table trifecta had grown. Veritek and friends, Manny and David and friends, and 14-year-old Jesse and his mom. I could barely eat, trying to prolong this experience by ordering dessert, asking for more time, more water, anything. I watched every move the players made, even ignoring Mom, trying to eavesdrop on their conversations. When the waitress asked Big Papi for his order, this is no lie, he turned to me and asked, what did you have? I immediately replied, orange chicken, and he said to the waitress, I'll have 4. David Ortiz had just asked me what I was having, and he ordered my meal. This day could not have gotten any better. Mom is in total belief. We decided not to tell Dad of these goings on until we left the restaurant. Veritek had gone. I'd shaken his hand, wished him good luck. It's imperative to know that Ortiz had just come out with an autobiography that Mom had bought me in the hopes of getting it autographed in Baltimore. I approached his table and I said, I'm not going to ask you for an autograph or to take a picture, but I bought your book recently and have tickets to the game tonight and wondered if I brought it, would you sign it? He said, yeah, buddy, bring it by. I said, thank you. At the last second, I said, hey, Manny, after entirely forgetting that another one of my all-time favorites was sitting right next to me. We had to get to the ballpark when the gates opened at 5 o'clock for a 7:05 first pitch. With resounding success receiving autographs, I had my secrets and maneuvers for getting prime position. For 2 hours, I stood front row near the Red Sox dugout where the players warmed up and stretched. Ortiz completed his pregame routine without even an acknowledgement. We watched the game from our seats, but I only lasted 8 innings. The game would end in a 6-2 Red Sox win. The big hit? A bases-clearing double by none other than Big Papi. In the 9th, I slipped past security and sat right next to the Red Sox dugout, book in hand, hoping to catch Ortiz on his way into the clubhouse. When the final out was recorded and handshakes completed, we locked eyes, and he nodded his head at me. I was in. The butterflies in my stomach became full-fledged hummingbirds. But the Sox sideline reporter pulled him away for a post-game interview. The air within me was deflated. So close, I thought, but I didn't give up. He still had to make his way to the dugout. The interview concluded, and he acknowledged me again. I stuck my book over the railing for him to sign. I grabbed the Sharpie that belonged to the kid standing next to me, and I said, I need this. And there it was. He signed the book. As he handed it to me, I mentioned, it was the orange chicken for that big hit tonight, alluding to the lunch we had shared that afternoon. He pulled the book back, smiled, wrote something else, and handed it back to me for good. I read what he'd written. On the inside cover, his autograph, and underneath, a note that read, nice orange chicken. I looked up to say something, but he had disappeared into the clubhouse. It was the only autograph he signed the entire night. It was the orange chicken. That's my favorite Red Sox baseball story. I've lived and breathed Red Sox baseball nonstop since I was 4. Been to World Series games, seen walk-offs, and a no-hitter, but this one tops my list. And that's from Jesse, who lives in Hampton, New Hampshire. Actually, he lives in New York City now, but that's where he's from. Okay. So I get a lot of stories from people. I mean, most stories I get are by email, but some tell me over the phone. And I was put in touch with this man who gave me a story, and I'll finish the narrative after I get done. It's a great story. I was almost 12 years old, living in Crawfordville, Georgia, a small town 80 miles from Atlanta. It was April 8th, 1974, and Hank Aaron came to bat in the 4th inning against the Dodgers' Al Downing. Of course, Hank was sitting on 714 career home runs, tied with Babe Ruth. I'm sure the capacity crowd in Atlanta was as quiet as it was in my living room. People were divided regarding how they felt about the inevitable breaking of Ruth's record. There were baseball purists who thought that records are made to be broken, and there were those who didn't care to see records fall. Some simply couldn't abide a black man beating Babe's record. In my town, in my house, there was no question about wanting it to happen. Reception on our television was always spotty, depending on the weather and how you turned the antenna. It was a cloudy day, which thankfully made for good reception. I sat on my mom's easy chair in the living room, waiting for the pitch. When Hank hit that home run, I'd like to say it was as noisy in my living room as it was in the stadium, but I was concentrating far more on circling the bases with him than I was in listening. The couch was first base, the TV was second, another couch third, and then I was at home plate, back in the easy chair. I will never forget that moment. Many years later, in 1999, as a director of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, I had the chance to meet my idol, Hank Aaron. It was the 25th anniversary of the day he broke that record. The Kansas City Royals had brought him to the area for some functions, and I had the distinct honor of touring him through the museum. Preparing for this tour, I had been a wreck. I debated for an eternity what clothes I should wear just to greet him. At the museum, there was a huge media throng. As we toured, I showed Hank and his wife Billy a photo of when he was 17 years old, preparing to join the Indianapolis Clowns. It had been a long time since he'd seen that photo. He mentioned that before he had the nickname Hammer and Hank, in the Negro Leagues, he was called Pork Chops. I asked him about that, and he said it was probably the only thing he knew how to order off the menu. I remember so many things about that day, including his comment that the day had brought some painful memories for him. He had been under constant threat of harm as he neared the crowd, and he feared for his family. After the ceremony, we went to the Gym Theater across the street. There was a public discussion hosted by Jason Whitlock and Joe Posnanski. The place was filled. After the discussion, Hank, Billy, and I adjourned to an office room where we enjoyed a great meal of Gates barbecue ribs. I couldn't believe it. I was eating ribs with my all-time hero. To this day, on the occasions when I see Mr. Aaron, he always asks if I brought ribs. And that, of course, is from Bob Kendrick, who is still the director of the museum. He gave me the story over the phone. I wrote it up, and as I always do when I get a story that way, I emailed it to him and I asked if it was okay. When my wife and I were driving cross country, we stopped at the museum and Bob gave me 30 minutes. It was really wonderful. And at the very end, I asked him if the story was okay. And he said it was perfect except for just one thing. We're in Kansas City, Missouri, not Kansas City, Kansas. And I said, well, that was a change I could easily make. This is a story from a guy that we met on a cruise. When they seated us, he jumped up, he introduced himself, and he gave me this story. This is from a chapter that's called Triples. So triples consists of groups of stories that have three things to do with each other. The triple in this case is all about watching a ball game with somebody from another country. My wife Jane and I rank between a 5 and a 6 on the baseball fan scale. We like to watch games on TV and attend a number each year if our team, the Rangers, are doing well. In the summer of '93, the Rangers were having a good season, attendance was up, and one of my all-time favorite pitchers, Nolan Ryan, would be pitching against the White Sox. We loaded up and headed to the ballpark. I should have asked him what he meant by we loaded up, but maybe it's just as well I didn't know. We found our seats, and right in front of us was a young couple in their mid to late 20s from Australia. As we began to chat before the game, they told us where they had been and what they had seen. They were having an adventure, making friends and memories on their travels. Their mates in Australia told them they needed to go to a ball game while in the United States, and this was the night. After several innings of strikeouts, walks, pop-ups, grounders to second, the score was 0-0, and the young man turned to his girlfriend and in a typical Australian accent said, "Well, this is bloody boring." He couldn't understand why Americans were so excited about baseball. His next step? Buy a couple more beers from a nearby vendor. Rangers pitcher Nolan Ryan, 46-year-old future Hall of Fame right-hander, was having a so-so game. The Sox batting coach was having his hitters crowd home plate to protect the outside corner. Getting frustrated, Ryan started throwing inside, moving the batters back to increase the strike zone. Robin Ventura, anybody know where this is going? An up-and-coming, what? An up-and-coming 26-year-old left-handed batter came to the plate. As coached, Ventura hugged the plate. Ryan threw a high fastball on the inside. Ventura jumped back. To show he was not going to be intimidated, he set up even closer to the plate, and you guessed it, Ryan threw another inside fastball. The combination of Ventura's location, the speed of the fastball, Ryan hit Ventura in the arm, and the umpire sent Ventura to first base. After 2 or 3 steps toward first, Ventura decided to make his infamous charge to the mound. Ryan squared up, and when Ventura reached the mound, Ryan grabbed him around the neck with his left arm and proceeded to beat the crap out of him with his right. Both benches emptied, mayhem ensued. The rest of the story is baseball history. At that exact moment, the Aussie exclaimed, "This is bloody fantastic! It's starting to make me feel homesick!" He then said he now understood why Americans love baseball. To this day, I'm fairly certain this extremely excited young Australian believed that having a brawl during a baseball game was a common experience. I did not want to spoil his baseball adventure. That is from Alan Foudy in Dallas, Texas. This is a story from a woman. I met her son at a ball game. He has stories in both my books. He's got a lot of his family have stories in the books. Interesting stories. This is the story from his mom. It's from my second book. I don't know why the chapter, My First Game, wasn't the first chapter in the first book. I obviously have myself to blame. I'm guessing I didn't have enough good stories at that time, but this is her story. In truth, I'm not exactly sure if this is my story or my son's to share. I'm the baseball fan in the family. My husband's more of a football fan. I grew up rooting for the Phillies with my dad, who never stopped complaining about 1964, and I didn't care about the Cardinals until I moved to St. Louis in the 70s. In the summer of 90, I was pregnant, and as always, it was hot, humid, not at all pleasant. I already had 2 children, aged 3 and 5. I wasn't feeling well, so I took myself to the doctor, who told me rather matter-of-factly that I had miscarried. My instructions? Go home, stay inside, and rest. Not wanting to wallow in sadness, I decided that my kids should not be deprived of fun. So, instead of following the doctor's orders, I took them to Busch Stadium for a game. The next day, I decided to get a second opinion on my medical condition, and lo and behold, I was still pregnant. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I choose to believe that it was the Cardinals that sustained the boy that we named Ari. His first official game was before he was even born. And if that doesn't make Ari a lifetime baseball fan, well, I don't know really what would. I only wish the doctor who was so cavalier regarding my condition was alive to read this story and see my 6-foot, 5-inch tall son sporting his Cardinals cap, sitting with his similarly uniformed sons on his lap. That's from Ellen Stein, who lives in Modi'in, Israel. The first book had a chapter also that it was called Generation to Generation, Family in Baseball. And that also became one of the core chapters. And I knew that chapter had to be repeated in this book. In this book, the chapter is called The Bats and Balls That Gloves That Bind. And this is one of the stories. I've been lucky to be at a number of memorable baseball games. I was at the ALCS game when Chris Chambliss hit a legendary home run that brought the Yankees back to the World Series. I went to many old-timers games with my dad and my brother Ron and watched Dad's face as he got as emotional seeing Joe DiMaggio announced as I did watching Mickey Mantle's name called. That made me realize that our parents were once kids too, and they also had their idols. I was at Mantle's retirement day, sitting in the upper deck, cheering and crying for what seemed like hours. A short stop, I was at that game. It was one of the greatest games I've ever been to. Mickey Mantle was my idol. I want to be clear, however, I am no longer a Yankees fan. And in fact, the Red Sox are my American League team, and that is the truth. My best baseball memories involve my dad. He was born to a father who was a Dodgers fan, as were most of Dad's friends. I can only speculate it was Dad's one teenage act of rebellion when he declared himself a Yankees fan, and his kids were raised to be Yankees fans. I was my parents' firstborn. Dad didn't care that I was a girl. He just wanted to teach his kid how to catch, throw, and hit a baseball. That was what mattered to him. He wanted to play ball with his kid, regardless of the gender. I grew to love playing baseball, was quite good at it, and was pretty mad that I wasn't allowed to play Little League. I threw right-handed, but batted from the left side. Dad got angry and my 7th grade teacher tried to make me bat right-handed. He always told me I can do anything I want. My bond with him was strong, in no small part because of baseball. When Dad passed away, I began my eulogy by saying Dad was a feminist, even though he didn't know it at the time. Maybe I didn't then either, but I sure do now. That's from Riva Lisansky in Los Angeles, California. Sorry, folks.
Eric, could I jump in here for a second?
Yes, you can.
I wanted to ask you if you would mind if I open this up to our members to see as if they could discuss any of their poignant stories about baseball with us.
Absolutely. That's what I like to do at the end, but I'm totally fine with you doing it now. Please, please. That would be great.
So, folks, if you have a story that you would like to share with us tonight, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button. You'll see another button marked raise hand. Hit that button, raise your hand, and we will get you in line to speak with our presenter and share your story tonight. Eric is going to really want to hear these stories, I think, because it will be a nice compliment to the books that he has written. One of the interesting things that I'd like to just toss out there, Eric, you mentioned Aaron's 715 and that story. My dad's favorite player was Henry Aaron. And I can vividly recall being placed on the floor in front of our 25-inch RCA console television that would have murdered a man had it been dropped on him. It weighed more than I think my current automobile does. And I watched Aaron hit that home run because my father wanted me to see that moment for a lot of reasons. Many of them that, Vince Scully talked about. A black man is getting a standing ovation in the Deep South, things like that. But it's very interesting how your book can be used as a centerpiece for the ties that bind baseball fans around the world.
Thank you. And I'm very proud about that. And a lot of people have said that. A lot of people have said to me, just giving me a chance to think about these stories was something I would never have done. And thank you. And thank you for that, Bruce.
That's a very good point. That reading this book, it illuminates the fact that all of us, whether you're on this call or you're watching us on YouTube or what have you, has a baseball story that anybody can relate to if they're a baseball fan. And I think the project and the books that have resulted from the projects are these poignant and beautiful tomes full of just richness and beauty and just wonderful stuff. Let's go to Ryan McClanahan. What's going on, Ryan? How you doing this evening, brother?
I'm good. How you guys doing? Everybody
We're
good?
doing great. Well, my pipes are frozen. It's freezing. I got 2 foot of snow. Can you come up and shovel my walk?
It's the same thing here.
Oh, God. Spray can't come fast enough, man. Go. Save me. Help me out here.
So, Eric, this was awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I have a real quick story. So, in 2004, I was at the National, and I was, just at a table looking at some baseball cards, and the guy next to me, I see he's looking through some cards too. And as I'm looking at him, I noticed. I actually kind of said to him, "Hey, has anyone ever told you you look like Reggie Jackson?" And he turned to me and said, "That's because I am." And he walked off, and I didn't even know. So that's my quick story.
There's a story in the book. There's a great writer. His name is A.J. Jacobs. He's not a baseball writer, and he's not even a big baseball fan. But his story is about going to the World Series game, and Reggie hit 3 home runs. It's from the chapter that's called Let's Beat the Crowds. His father was not a baseball fan. He hit the 2 home runs. His father said, "Let's go." And he said, "Well, Dad, what if he hits a third?" He said, "It's not going to happen. I don't want to, let's get out of here." They're on the train platform. They hear a huge roar. Reggie had hit the 3rd home run. He said, "People were talking about it for weeks. I didn't talk to my dad for months. But there was something nice about having the platform all to ourselves."
So I actually have a Reggie Jackson story that I can't repeat on camera because it doesn't make Reggie look all that great. Someday, Eric, come to the National in Dallas, the National Convention in Dallas. I'll tell you the story. It's kind of funny, but I'm not going to tell it on camera because I might get myself in trouble. Let's go north of the border to my good friend Maxwell Cates. Max, how are you? You are on mute, my brother.
I just said I'm muted, but I'm doing all right. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. You are up. What do you got?
September 1st, 2019. I had tickets to see the Houston Astros play the Toronto Blue Jays. And I look at the pitching matchups and I'm going, oh, Verlander's pitching. And I said, Verlander's one of those guys who's capable of throwing a no-hitter every time he goes out there. But I know he's not going to throw one tonight because he's already thrown one against the Blue Jays in Toronto. Nobody has ever no-hit the same team twice on the road. Well, that statistic was correct at that time. I went to the game with my friend Harvey and his 2 boys. The 4th inning, I turned to Harvey, I said, "Look at the scoreboard. There's something interesting about it. And when you see it, don't say what it is." You see, Kevin Biggio had made it on base on a walk, but he was the only Blue Jay to make it as far as first base. The next Blue Jays hit of the game would be the first. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, same story, but there's one slight problem. Houston didn't score any runs either. Top of the ninth, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. We thought it was going to be a 1, 2, 3 inning. Abraham Toro comes up to bat with one runner on. Abraham Toro was batting a .176. Cranks one into left field. Home run, 2-0 Astros. After an 18-minute bottom of the ninth, there is no longer an absence of any pitcher to have thrown a no-hitter against the same team twice on the road. I had predicted that Verlander was not going to pitch a no-hitter that day, and he pitched a no-hitter.
Love it. Love it. I saw a no-hitter in my minor league baseball days with the old New Britain Rockcats. We were on the road, and I think it was Harrisburg. I'd have to go back and look it up now because it was a blur of a road trip where we were just all over Pennsylvania. But I remember some friends of mine from Connecticut listening in on the radio, blowing up my phone saying, "What's happening? This isn't going to happen, is it?" And sure enough. Hey, Ben, turn that camera on, my man. There
All right.
he is. Ben Abel, you're up. Go.
Yeah, it's actually kind of a funny story because I shared it at the beginning of this podcast or your live stream, Bruce. Is just the fact that I actually got the Canadiens manager on my podcast, and I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna blindly reach out to him through Twitter via DM and see if it actually works. And I'm like, holy smokes, it actually worked. And then when he responded, he's like, here's my email address. And I'm like, well, yeah, that makes sense. It's first and last name @bluejays.com. I'm like, okay, so now I've got an actual official email from one of the Blue Jays minor league managers to reach out to him to coordinate having him on the podcast. At that time, still obviously employed or working for the Vancouver Canadians before his transfer to New Hampshire. So it was kind of a like, let's see if I could actually do it. But one of the goals of my podcast for season 4 was to actually get, I don't want to say legitimate guests from sports teams, but if you get the actual manager from the actual team, you've done something correct.
There's so many ways to tell a baseball story and so many avenues by which those stories are created. They're not just created in the ballpark and on the field. You know, Ben points out, they're created on social media when you're trying to create content that other people can enjoy and you're supporting your team and you're not even in the ballpark. And here's Ben talking about he was able to grab Brent and get him on his podcast. It's a great story about a sheer happenstance meeting on Twitter that results in a kinship that hopefully we're going to be benefiting from as time moves along. Eric, there any other books in this series coming?
Could well be. I'm going to do I have some time to tell a few more stories?
Absolutely. You've got some time to tell a few more stories.
I'm going to keep it short because I want to keep this to an hour. I'm going to read a couple of stories, take a quick little break, explain, answer your question, and then finish with 2 more stories. Is that okay?
Okay. Perfect.
I'm going to cut down. I told you before, Bruce, I always have far more stories than I have time for. This is from the chapter called Triples. In this particular set of triples, it's environmental. I'm going to read 2 of the stories, which are both very personal for me. The third story, Maxwell, is from our friend Susan Heim, and it was about going to a doubleheader in Toronto, and the second game, it got so cold and it started to snow that the organist started playing Christmas carols. So obviously the connection here is environmental stuff, and let me read these 2 to you right now. It was a typically cold, foggy, windy night at Candlestick Park in the middle of the summer 1976. 5 of us went to Candlestick to see the Giants host the Mets in one of their 2 yearly visits. I was with my good friends Eric Ray, Lynn Rhodes, Alan Fram, and Becky Marsh. As I said, it was cold, bitter cold. We were sitting in the top section of the grandstand down the third base side. It was very cold. After the third inning, since it was cold, I set off to buy hot chocolate for the group. Imagine hot chocolate for a summer baseball game. If you've ever visited Candlestick, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Between the incredibly long lines and unbelievably slow service, I returned to my seat right about the time of the seventh inning stretch. I lost over 3 innings of the ball game at the concession stand. I didn't need that stretch. My friends, wearing winter coats, had draped a huge warm blanket over them. I squeezed right into the middle with my hot chocolate, covered with that blanket, and surrounded by my friends. I don't quite recall if that hot chocolate was still hot when I got to my seat, or like the foggy, windy air, it was already cold. That's my friend Ira, who passed away before he had a chance to write that story. I wrote it as I know that Ira would have written it. And so that's that. It was the hottest baseball game I'd ever been to, and I'm from Texas, so that's saying something. Washington, D.C., 4th of July, 2011, 11 in the morning start time. It was me and the guys, my boyfriend, David, 4 of our friends, and David's father, Eric, who was in town visiting. Around the top of the second, we were all settled in, quickly warming beer in hand, really starting to feel the heat. The sun was beating down on us, and we could feel ourselves starting to roast. I was sitting next to Eric, and I offered him some sunscreen. He squeezed the tube, and all of a sudden, a large blob arced toward the head of the woman in front of us. I think we both saw it happen in slow motion, but there was no stopping it. This woman was going to get sunscreen in her hair, or actually right in the part in the middle of her hair, of her head. It made contact, stuck, and the woman didn't turn around. She sat watching the game, clapping, seemingly completely unaware. We sat there slack-jawed, me trying not to laugh hysterically, and Eric saying, "Oh my God, what did we do?" At this point, I was thinking, we? I had no part in this. But I'd only known Eric for a few months, and I knew we should try to help. I told him we should probably tell this poor woman she had sunscreen that looked like bird poop on the top of her head and was already beginning to congeal. Eric was too embarrassed. He said, and this is where I always interject and say, I'm a nice guy, but I'm not the brightest guy. Eric said, we should leave it and hope it evaporated. Now, I'm no chemist, but at this point, I was thinking there's no way this congealing liquid was going to turn into a gas and magically make believe it hadn't happened. Eric wouldn't be convinced. Instead, we spent the rest of the game sweating our butts off, rooting for the Giants, who were under some sort of curse at Nationals Park, tortuously watching sunscreen dry and adhere to this woman's scalp. But hey, we're going with maybe we help protect her from cancer. And at least Eric and I still have that bonding experience to joke about to this day. Now, this was the second, maybe the third time I'd ever met Lisa. Now, this is from Lisa Allen. You would think at that point that she would have started to get the clue about what she was getting involved in. But no, she married my son. So it all worked out quite well. I'm going to read one story from a chapter that's called The Negro Leagues. Anyway. Just before baseball returned to D.C. in 2005, I was working as Washington correspondent for the Norfolk, Virginia Pilot. Norfolk had been in the running to get the Montreal team, so my editors had an interest in stories about the transfer. I learned of a group of people working to name the team the Washington Grays to honor the Homestead Grays who had played in D.C. through much of their glory days in the Negro Leagues. I tracked down some former players and a lot of background on black baseball. One afternoon in 2004, the phone rang. "Dale," the voice on the line said, "this is Buck O'Neill." In 37 years as a reporter, I had occasion to interview presidents and presidential candidates, Supreme Court justices, generals, admirals, all manners of politicians. None stuck in my memory like 10 minutes on the phone with Buck. He painted word pictures of daytime crowds at Griffith Stadium and nights on the town at clubs with performers like Louis Armstrong and Count Basie. I was awestruck. He talked about how DC fans had embraced the Grays, how the team took pride in knowing that their games routinely outdrew the Senators, who of course also played at Griffith Stadium. He also talked about how much the players looked forward to coming to DC, where there was a large black population and a black middle class that could and did support restaurants and nightlife. He thought that giving the Grays the name to the relocated Expos might aid his pet project, getting more inner city African-American kids interested and playing baseball. It would take a lot more than a name to do the job, he reminded me, but reviving the Greys and their tradition would surely help. When people ask me what was the high point of my time in journalism, I never hesitate. I talked to Buck O'Neill, I said. And that's from Dale Eisman, who lives in Springfield, Virginia. So I'm going to take a short break and tell you a couple of things. First of all, yes, there may very well be a third book. I'm going to talk about my next project, but there may very well be a third book. I've gotten a number of stories still. The more great stories I get without killing myself, the more likely it is that I will do a third book. So I do encourage all of you to send me your story. I can be reached at eric.baseballstories@gmail.com. It's a long address, but it's a pretty simple one. eric.baseballstories, plural, @gmail.com. If any of you are interested in getting my book, of course, it's available online. It's also available if you want a signed copy from me. You can get it directly from me. The cost is the same. The only difference is the shipping, and we can discuss that. I like to sign the books, and I don't write just enjoy. I write my name. If you're interested in getting the books, please contact me. If any of you belong to an organization, another SABR group that would like to have me do a talk like this, that would be great. I know there are some people from New Jersey here. I'm going to be in Philadelphia at the end of June for a wedding, but we're going to spend a couple of days. If the folks in New Jersey would like me to come and do a book talk, I would absolutely love to do that. I'll do them any place that we're going to be. Perry, you've been to a number of these things. Maybe even next month in Texas, in Phoenix. Anyway, please tell other organizations you belong to. I'm willing to do these talks. The final thing I want to say is the next project I'm working on is similar in nature to this, but it's about people's music and concert stories. Now, I know you're not supposed to say this to a baseball audience. I love baseball, but music is far more important to me than baseball. So if you have a music story about a concert or anything else, I want it. I don't care what the genre is. I don't care who the artist is. I hate opera, but I've got a story from a guy who's an opera singer, and it's a doozy. I'm a huge Beatles freak, okay? But I don't want the book to be all Beatles and Dead and Dylan. I want stories from a younger generation who are listening to artists that I've never even heard of. So if you have a story, and more to the point, or additionally, if you know people who might have a story, please send it to me. You can use the email address that Bruce put, or you can say eric.concertstories@gmail.com. Either way, they're going to get to me. And I'm going to tell you briefly 2 quick stories that will be in this book. I went to what I think is the greatest concert of all time. It was George Harrison's concert for Bangladesh. Many of you know that his mentor on sitar was Ravi Shankar, and when Bangladesh became a country, Ravi asked George to put on a benefit concert, the first ever. At this concert was George, of course, Ringo, Dylan, Clapton, Billy Preston, Leon Russell, my second favorite band of all time, Badfinger. Some of you are going to say, who? If you like the Beatles and you don't know Badfinger, please contact me because I'll do a little tutorial for you. They're great. It was just an incredible show. When Harrison sang the last song, which was the song Bangladesh, and I'm getting goosebumps like I always do, and he sang the last line, "We've got to relieve Bangladesh," and he put his guitar in the stand and walked off stage, I will never, ever forget that standing ovation. It was 61 years ago. It was August 1st, 1971. I will never forget that ovation and the chills I felt. I also won't forget what the girl who I brought to this concert, the girl I was dating, what she said to me at some point during this concert when she looked at me and said, "Oh, this is so loud." And I looked at her and I thought, but did not say, "Oh, you're so not the one for me." That is going to be in the book, I can guarantee. The other story is my brother's story. I'm sure many of you know who Peter Noon is, right?
Yep.
Herman's Hermits. Okay. I love Herman's Hermits. I mean, who doesn't? But they were Herman's Hermits. And my brother loved this group. And he goes to see Peter Noon about 10 years ago, Sausalito Arts Festival. And his wife says to him, you got to buy a CD. Peter will sign it for you. As Peter Noone is signing the CD, my brother says the stupidest thing ever said in the Western Hemisphere. He says to Peter Noone, my brother and I used to argue, fight, debate, whatever verb it was, who is better, Herman's Hermits or the Beatles? My brother thought the Beatles. I thought Herman's Hermits. Peter Noone puts down his pen, looks up at my brother and said, you was wrong. And I just absolutely love that story. You do not need to be a genius to know that, but his humility, his self-deprecation, his quick wit, that just made it a great story. So there you've got my next project, music and concert stories, a baseball story too. And I'm going to finish with just a couple of stories.
Hey, Eric, before you do that,
Yep.
Were you at the 2:30 show or the 8 o'clock show?
2:30 show. It was the early show. I don't know what time it was. It was the early show. And I hated myself for praying that the people at the late show would not see John Lennon. There was a rumor that Lennon was going to show up. And I felt like such a jerk for hoping that because I didn't see him, the people at the late show would also not have the chance to see him. He didn't come, but I was at that show and it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And again, if you like the Beatles and you like rock and you only know 4 hits by Badfinger, I absolutely encourage you to contact me and I will change your world. Well, that's a slight exaggeration, but I will certainly give you a tutorial about the best band that nobody really knows. This is a story that is from a section of my first book I called Coming Bat-tractions in an effort to be clever. There were chapters that I knew were going to go in the second book, but I needed to get some stories in this. This is the story for my daughter. My daughter runs a press elevator, as I think I mentioned before, at the ballpark. And the chapter in the second book is called Ushers and Vendors and Ball Boys, Oh My. I thought about reading her Jeff Kent story, but I'm going to read this one instead. As you know, Giants fans have taken a hit in their history lately. In the last year or so, they've lost Willie Mays, Willie McCovey, and Orlando Cepeda. And I'm reading this story kind of in recognition of that. I was 17 years old in my 3rd year as a guest services staff member for the San Francisco Giants. I was serving as press elevator operator, which in a way sounds dull, but gave me the opportunity to meet famous people. One day, one of those celebrities rode up and down several times, and finally he looked at me and said in a deep but friendly voice, "Hello, my name is Orlando." Long pause. Cepeda. I looked at him and smiled sheepishly, and then with a big ear-to-ear smile on my face, I replied, "I know who you are." He replied, "And what's your name?" I looked at him for what seemed like hours. It was probably only 10 seconds. Nothing came out of my mouth. I finally looked at my name tag and said, Rachel. Ever since then, he just calls me baby. And that's for my daughter, Rachel Gray. Perry, I think you've met her. Maxwell, I know you did. And she took you on a nice tour of the press area, didn't she?
Yeah, she sure did.
I'm going to finish with this story. And again, it's torturous for me to cut these down because I could go forever, but you probably had enough of me. And I'm going to read this story now. This is also from the chapter that's called My Player, My Team, My Game. How does a love for baseball develop? You hear tales of Ebbets Field and cowbells, Comiskey Park, Nancy Faust's organ, eating your first Dodger dog, being a bum in the bleachers at Wrigley, be it Koufax, Ted Williams, Reggie's 3 bombs in '77, Junior's backwards cap, someone turned all fans' eyes that first time, and baseball became their love. Mine? A little-known outfielder from Puerto Rico, Pepe Mangual, who played from 1972 to '77 with the Expos and the Mets. My first live game started my love affair. A walk-off grand slam? Nah, he had no pop. Steal home? He had speed, but nothing that dramatic. Game-saving catch? He was a decent center fielder, but again, no. On Friday, September 5th, 1975, a young, hopeful, not terribly talented last place Expos team took on the first place Pirates in a twilight doubleheader. It was my first time inside Jarry Park, which until then had been nothing but a dream castle on the TV set to a 9-year-old who had just started following baseball. In the opener, Bruce Kyson was wild and didn't make it out of the first. Bob Moose, who would tragically die 13 months later, came in to toss 5 2/3 innings. Now I'm going to digress for 1 minute. I'm sure many of you know this. The Pirates in those days had 3 pitchers named Moose, Veal, and Lamb, and you can't make that stuff up. The game went back and forth, and into extra innings it went. My young blood was pumping, and Jarry Park was rocking to the house organ, 15,000 fans on their feet as the Expos came up. Young side-arming Kent DeCulvey took the mound. Walks, wild pitches, pass balls, got McKinnon to third, Lyle to second, Jerry White to first, bases loaded for center fielder Pepe Mangual. Pepe entered the game as a pinch hitter in the 7th inning, hitting a nondescript 247. But what would a kid know other than that it was the bottom of the 10th and the bases were loaded? Bruce Fleming was the umpire behind the plate. I don't recall how many total pitches were thrown, but the count was 2-2 as Pepe fouled off pitch after pitch, every fan on their feet screaming, willing Pepe to not fail. I was in awe and wanted in that moment more than anything ever to win the game. It had been a horrific week in my life, filled with trauma. A young boy from small town Towanda, Pennsylvania, I went to visit my grandparents, not knowing my parents were splitting up and I would never return home. I was to stay in Montreal, a new kid in school, French-speaking folks hating English-speaking people and vice versa, mere months before a hated separatist government came to power, forever changing the Quebec landscape. It was a terrifying experience for this small-town kid. None of that mattered right now. I just needed Pepe to win it for us. He worked the count full, fouled off a couple more. I couldn't take it anymore. The next pitch was just a little outside, as Bob Uecker might say. Fleming motioned ball 4, and the Expos mobbed Pepe as he trotted to first, and McKinnon walked home. A 4-3 Expo victory for that small, scared 9-year-old boy who would have to face his new life and surroundings once again on Monday morning. Nothing else mattered. I found love in Montreal, the love of the Expos, the love of Pepe Mangual, my new could-do-no-wrong hero, and my new greatest love, one that would last a lifetime without fail, baseball. That's Patrick Gutton, who lives in Sandpoint, Idaho, where he's a disc jockey. He and I are friends. This story has a little special moment for me. My granddaughter calls me Pepe. I don't know why. It's the most ridiculous name for a Jewish grandpa. And every single time she calls me that, I melt a little more. And nobody knows this except for the thousands of people I've showed it to you. This is the back of my second book. That's my granddaughter when she was 2.5. And my son having a catch, because I wanted a picture that would show, both genders, multiple generations. And I was thinking a little boy and his mom, a little girl and her dad. And I said, wait a minute, I got one of those. And my son's wife's a photographer, so it worked out perfectly.
All right, last raps is Dixie.
What?
It's me. Great stories. This is the second time I've seen you do this. It's great, both times.
Thank you.
I do have a couple of stories, including a no-hitter that I can email you.
Please.
But my comment this evening is about the opera.
Okay, great.
I am not an opera buff, far from it. But I will tell you that I may be able to change your mind just a bit. And it's not based on the opera, it's based on the venue. Location, location. I have seen 24 operas, but I've seen them all in Cooperstown at the Glimmerglass Opera House.
Yes.
If you have the chance, you must go there.
Unbelievable that you would say that. And remember what I said before, something always reminds me of something else. So there's a story in my book from a guy I met on a baseball book. He actually has 2 stories in my book, which is very rare. And it involved him being asked to sing the national anthem at the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Now, he's from America. He's an opera singer in Germany. His story is about doing Aida, where the elephant relieved himself on stage during the opera, and they had to re-choreograph on the spot. But what I didn't do, again, I didn't fact check myself, although the editor for the second book did. He wrote that he was from the Glimmerglass Opera Company, and that's what he said. And that to me sounded like it could be from Germany. I didn't bother to check. Why would they bring a guy from Germany to Cooperstown? And the editor of my book found it and made it the Glimmerglass Opera Company of Cooperstown, New York. So again, everything reminds me of something else. Thank you, Dixie. Does anybody have any questions?
No, just the
Max, go.
Good job there. I got my Badfinger album here. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, Magic Christian. That's my least favorite of their 6, but there's some really great stuff on it.
It's The Last Survivor in vinyl.
Got it.
Max?
All right, first of all, Moroccan Jews call their grandfathers Pepe.
Well,
I didn't know that.
We're definitely not Moroccan, but that's
No, I know.
good to know.
That was number one. Number two, regards to you from Susan Heim and Bill Levinson and Pat Murphy, who you know as Pat Gutton. I told all of them that you were telling their stories. Well, not Bill, but they all send their regards.
Thank you.
And number three, I spent enough time with you to know that your hero outside of baseball was Hubert Humphrey, who lent his name to a baseball stadium.
Right.
Have you ever seen a game there, or do you have any stories about the Metrodome in your book?
I have one, not at the Metrodome, but one at the current stadium, and it was from the chapter called Love and Baseball, and it was how I was able and willing to endure my wife having what I described, I think, as a nightmare in a glass. It was a Bloody Mary with like a hamburger and all kinds of stuff, and it just, looking at it, made me ill. And I just said, if that's not love, being able to endure this, well, I don't know what would be.
I will tell you that there are stories that came out of last year's SABR convention that I can neither confirm or deny, but they had to do with our CEO dancing with several Twins fans in, I think it was the right field bleachers somewhere. I don't know quite the whole story, but I know Scott and I think Dan Evans had one heck of a time that night. So we could probably tie that in with your Minnesota memories. What do you say, Eric?
I say it's great. You know, people ask me to send a book description, and I explain what I'm looking for, but I don't explain what I'm looking for because I give examples like the best game you had, the first game, you're catching a ball, this or that. And most of the people have just simply ignored the guidelines that they were asking for, and they gave me stories that made the book so much richer. So, you know, it's like you get a sense of what these stories are. It could be anything.
Exactly. It's just the ties that bind us in baseball.
Yep.
And that's the whole point of all of this evening, as far as I'm concerned.
I am absolutely convinced, and I can't really explain why, but that you could not write this kind of book about any other sport. Maybe soccer.
Spot on.
Maybe soccer on an international level. I don't know. But there's something about baseball, and I don't need to explain this to you folks. There's something about baseball that just allowed this to happen. I couldn't even imagine doing it for another sport.
All right, last one's Molly.
First of all, Eric, I'm sorry I was on and off the screen tonight. Couldn't help it. But for the bit that I did hear, it made me think about the fact that Bruce and I brought Ian to his first major league game this past summer with his best friend fielding, and how much fun they had.
This is a grandchild?
No, it's my 13-year-old son.
Oh, to his first game at 13. Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Eric, we're not that far along. Come on, man. Come on.
Think so. You're not my age. Honestly, I can't imagine a kid waiting to 13 to go to his first game. So there you go.
Well, we got free tickets, and you know, Fenway's pretty expensive for a kiddo who likes to roam. So, you know, he's not exactly one to stay in his seat. So we were waiting till he was a little older that we knew he would stay in his seat to take him.
Got it. I understand. I fulfilled my desire. I've taken each of my grandchildren to their first game in Nationals Park. The first one, Juliet, she was 2.5. Her name is on the scoreboard. She got her bag of swag. We pummeled her with Take Me Out to the Ball Game all the way to the stadium, and she sang it. She had no idea what was going on, but boy, did she have a good time. And that story will be in the third book if I do it, which I'm sure I will.
Fantastic stuff. This has been great. Hey, let's do this again Wednesday night, shall we? We're going to have the vice president of SABR's board of directors with us. That's right. Allison Levin will be here to give her SABR 52 presentation, Gender Work, the evolution of WAGs from support system to celebrity influencer. The link to sign up is in the meeting booklet distributed each Monday and also available on the SABR events calendar at saber.org/events. If you're enrolled in our service that signs you up for meetings automatically, you'll receive your join the meeting email Wednesday morning. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you are not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community. Offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom, SABR boasts more than 35 different research communities, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to saber.org/join today. Eric Gray, you are spectacular. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Bruce. Thanks to all of you who sat through this. I love doing this, and I really appreciate all of you being here. Thank you.
Well, we loved having you in tonight. We really appreciate you, and we're going to get everybody out of here and see everybody Wednesday night. So have a good night, everybody.
So long.